Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, good morning, afternoon, depending on where you are, everybody. My name is Hugh Simpson-Wells, CEO of Oxford Computer Group, and I'm here to tell you something about what we're doing with training with regards to FIM as it changes to MIM, and I'll go a little beyond that as well. Now, if I can move on to the next slide, I've got a bit of an agenda here. So MIM's been released. A quick run through of what's new, changes to the core product. Then there is the business of privileged access management, which is an additional usage of MIM, and my colleague James Cowling will be talking to you about that. And then how does this affect training courses? Then I'll go on to talk about MIM in a wider context, because MIM is now part of EMS suite, that's Enterprise Mobility Suite. What part does it play in that? I'll talk more generally about Microsoft synchronization technologies, because that's a continuing journey, even while MIM is looking largely like FIM in many ways. And how do we see training courses developing with respect to MIM and enterprise mobility? I will then drill down into some specifics. To the extent that time allows, I'll do some demonstrations of some new MIM features and also AD Connect and EMS so that you can see what that looks like, because I think that gives us an idea about the future of EMS. Finally, I'll put up a slide about some upcoming training courses and an offer relating to this webinar. Very briefly about us, Oxford Computer Group, many of you will know us. We do training courses, consulting and system integration. Training courses, training has always been in our DNA. It's been often the start of what we do, and we found it to be a very important part of our business, even though it's perhaps one of the smaller parts of our business. We actually won our first Microsoft Partner Award almost 25 years ago, and that was for training. And we most recently won an award this year for enterprise mobility. So that'll give you a little bit of an idea about our arc as a Microsoft partner. Actually, for the last just over 10 years, 12 years now, identity and access has been everything that we have focused on. We've been absolute specialists in that. And as that discipline has moved towards the cloud, so have we. And now most of our consulting work involves element of hybrid, so it involves on-premises and cloud-integrated environments. And our training courses, of course, need to move that way too. And not only in terms of the content, as we talk more about hybrid within the training that we provide, but of course how we deliver, because we can now deliver in different ways. We can deliver remotely as well as physically in a classroom, and we can deliver on an on-demand basis, and I'll talk about that some more as well. So Microsoft Identity Manager 2016, it's available. Microsoft talk about 3 themes, and I'm going to touch on these: continuity, modernization, and privileged access management. So the continuity part of that is about building on FIM 2012 R2. Apologies that the find and replace daemon caught me out there. That should say MIM 2016 building on FIM 2010 R2. So all the existing FIM components remain supported. Nothing's been removed from the product. Pretty much everything that it FIM did, MIM will do. And it's substantially an in-place upgrade, although I have a little bit to say about that. For the server components, for the client component, well, that's the Outlook add-in and the password reset client. Of course, that's going to be distributed all over your various client computers, and that's a slightly different matter. The deprecated features list remains in force, so some of you will know that a number of features have been deprecated. In other words, it's been announced that they will be taken out at some point in the future. These are features that we for a long time suggested that you probably shouldn't use. There's some of the more esoteric features, some of the features that we might describe as academically impure. There is a link for you if you're interested in reminding yourself about that list. I won't go there now, but I will mention them again later. The sync engine continues to be developed, and I'll have more to say about that later as well. So continuity is about it's still fundamentally being the same product, but with some additions. Modernization then is about the changes that have been made in order to bring it up to date. For example, with the latest platforms, latest OS, latest Active Directory, and so on. Also, updating of APIs, so modern RESTful APIs, enabling, for example, the possibility of writing alternative UIs to sit on the service rather than the portal that you may be familiar with. Also, a number of hybrid areas, cloud-based components that are being updated. In particular, there's the ability to hook into Azure multi-factor authentication, and there's a limited amount of Azure reporting. So there's an agent that can push the password events within MIM into the cloud where they can be reported on along with other cloud activity. So a small token really of reporting, but maybe an indication of the direction that things are being taken. And then some other modernization around scenarios. For example, certificate enrollment. There's some domain join dependencies that have been removed. Support for heterogeneous platforms and so on. So general modernization. Particular addition is self-service account unlock. It's been long able to that we can do self-service password reset in MIM, but we found that there is a need for people to, when they've been locked out, to be able to unlock themselves without actually resetting their password. And subject to the choices made by administrators and users, this can now be done, and you'll see a simple dialogue there showing that as you do a password reset, you have a choice to just unlock the account. Certificate management, there's been a big update there. Now, first of all, we don't do a certificate management course. We're always interested to hear from people who are interested in a course, and if we really felt that the demand was there, we might be able to do something about that. But there were quite a lot of limitations in the existing product. Now, first of all, we need to say that certificate management is very much a separate product, always was, still is. There's very limited connectivity between FIM and certificate management, and it's even more standalone in its current form. So it comes under the same banner, if you like, but it is a separate product with its own workflows, its own interface, and its own database, and so on. It did have some limitations, and those have been substantially improved upon. So there's a new modern client, support for new OSs, and taking away some of the limitations that were there. Now, a major part of the release of MIM is its use with privileged access management. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, James Cowling, will introduce himself, but he's CTO of Oxford Computer Group, and I'll be doing the button clicks for him, but otherwise he's going to be talking. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Hugh. So yes, James Cowling, CTO, Oxford Computer Group. So I've been working closely with the product team on privileged access management, and it's a very interesting, and probably I would suspect the most interesting new part of the MIM 2016 product. So without needing to go into too much detail, the business of privileged access has been slightly neglected over the years, I believe. We have automated the business of access management for many of our users in any organization. But the privileged guys, the domain admins and the other administrators, have always been rather awkward to manage very tightly because of the need for them always to have administrative access. So we don't want to have the feeling that we might just cut them off from being able to do their administration. However, experience suggests that they are indeed the people who should most closely be managed. So they need to have their permissions very closely monitored, and also very commonly removed when they're not actually using them. Now, on this page, you're seeing a quick screenshot and a summary of some of the pieces of the privileged access management system. So the idea of the privileged access management system is that you can request the privileged access that you need as an administrator when you need it. This is the concept of just-in-time administration. So I am not an administrator most of the time. When I need to be an administrator, I go to the PAM system, request the administration role that I need, and use it for a limited period of time. After that limited period of time, it will be automatically removed. In the screenshot at the top right, you might be able to see the timeout, the length of period of time. So creation time and timeout will give you then an expiry time when my group membership will be removed. So this is the basic concept. The next slide, thank you, Hugh, will tell us about why we feel it necessary to remove privileged access. So this is a little bit of background of a specific attack that has been well documented and well analyzed. So the idea here is, as an example of the sort of attack we're trying to protect against. Over a period of time, the attackers, they were attacking a company of hundreds of thousands or more. They were finding a soft spot to try to introduce what we refer to as persistent, advanced persistent threats, advanced persistent threats, otherwise known as malware, but this is software that sits on a computer and will attempt to propagate itself through the network based on stolen credentials. So they found themselves a target, turned out to be an external employee who managed air conditioning units, and they managed to persuade him to click on a link inside the company, and a piece of malware was therefore installed. Now, the two methods that we're most interested in here, in order to install the software, he needed to be an administrator on the computer, okay? And it's very common for users to be administrators on their local computer to install printers and other small, drivers and whatever else. So he installed this software. With that software, he then had access, or rather this malware, had access to the cached credentials on that computer. And among the cached credentials of users who had recently logged themselves onto that computer was a help desk user. So that help desk user, the ticket was duly then stolen by the malware. And in a process called lateral movement, the malware was able to log itself onto another computer, moved sideways using this help desk guy's permissions, and logged onto another computer. And it kept doing this until it found a computer where the credential cache contained a more advanced set of credentials, in this case, a domain administrator's credentials. So the lateral movement moved us to a computer where finally a set of cached domain admin's credentials were held. And then, of course, privilege escalation takes place, where we then steal the domain admin's credentials and then move sideways until we find a domain controller, and then log ourselves onto the domain controller, create accounts, set passwords, and we created ourselves some backdoor users that enable us over the next 13 months to extract data at will from this network. So this was basically the attack. Now, that was mainly possible, apart from the human aspect, which is very hard to defend against. Some guy clicked on a link that was custom built for him. It was a spear phishing attack. It's very hard to defend against that specifically. But once you've done that, this attack required not only the user to be a local administrator, which is an interesting piece to defend against anyway, but also there were cached domain admin credentials around where even though the domain administrator had logged in some time before, those credentials were still valid as domain admin credentials. And this is what we're trying to protect against. We do not want our domain admins to be permanently able to do domain admin work, only when they specifically need to, and then those permissions need to be taken away. So this is the just-in-time and just-enough administration concept. So if we go to the next slide, we'll just look at some of the other pieces of the PAM system. So what we're trying to do is to suggest that the administrative groups in your normal network are vulnerable to misuse. They're first of all full of administrators most of the time. Our production network is the assumption, is vulnerable to malware, and we can't switch off enough of the legacy protocols and the various things that provide us with the vulnerabilities in that network because of the heterogeneous services we have to support in that production network. It's very hard to make a really locked down environment out of it. So the suggestion is that we establish a bastion, a safe environment, a new domain. In fact, it doesn't have to be a separate network, but a new domain with only the privileged users in it and very limited functionality. We're not trying to support heterogeneous services, just this one service, the PAM service, and a bit of domain controller work. So we can lock it right down. We can monitor everything. We can make it really quite hard to access because only admins are going to do it when they need to do admin. And then in the production environment, there is a trust. to trust the identities out of the Bastion network to come and do the administration. So the administrators out of the Bastion group will then use the same SID. They'll use SID history, which is automatically implemented across to the in quotes domain admin group that exists in the privileged environment. That domain admin group in the privileged environment for the production domain will have the SID of the production domain admins group in its SID history list. And then when the user in the privileged domain gets access to that group, they will naturally then be treated as a member of the production domain's domain admins group, if you follow what I'm saying. So let's move on to the next slide because there's a picture, I believe. And so the other is we have these two domains, and the PAM environment provides us then with we have to build the domains in some way. There will be a deployment pack that will help with scripting to get that whole business built. But the picture there shows us the production domain trusting the Bastion domain. There is MIM in this is MIM 2015, this was written a few months ago before it was 2016. In the Bastion domain then, or forest, we will have MIM, at least a MIM service. We don't need sync specifically, and we don't actually even need the portal specifically if we want to do everything with PowerShell or with custom portals of our own. So there'll certainly be a MIM service there, and the PAM, the Privileged Access Management APIs and PowerShell commandlets, depending on exactly how we want to trigger things. So those are the typical components. And then using tools which are provided with the PAM implementation, using those tools, we will be effectively copying privileged groups out of the production domain into the Bastion domain, creating them as PAM roles. Those PAM roles are copied into the privileged domain, into the Bastion domain, configured with a time to live, with a lifetime of the activation that can be used. And the members out of the production domain are created in the Bastion domain as candidate users. In other words, they're not permanent users in that group, they are candidates. A candidate is allowed to request automatically, in fact, in the initial case, can request automatically that their membership be activated. If you want to, you can add additional authentications and authorizations into that workflow. It's just a MIM workflow, like a FIM workflow. So you can add authentications and authorizations to it if you feel like it. The default assumption is that all of that is wrapped around becoming a candidate. Once you're a candidate member, you have been approved for this activity, and then at 2 o'clock in the morning when you need to do some administration, your boss doesn't get woken up to approve your request. But that's entirely up to you to configure that. So the PAM roles exist, and then the shadow groups exist that you then become a member of. The SID history is populated by the tools that do the migration, and then once you've activated your permission, you can log into the privileged account, get yourself a ticket that is then trusted into the production environment where you can do your appropriate administration work. So that's the concept, and gives us at last the tools that we need to wrap a good deal more protection around the privileged accounts that we're running, which, as I said at the beginning, has been a slightly neglected group of users. They're pretty highly monitored in general, but in terms of automated identity management, we really needed this sort of activity now for just-in-time administration. And now we have it. I think there might be one last summary slide. Which is there indeed, yes. So in general then, to summarize, the users don't have privileged access. Even privileged users like domain admins typically don't have persistent access in production. They're registered as a candidate, and they will request their privileged access be activated in PAM. That's all logged and so forth in PAM, and then they get their access granted, and they can go and perform their activities in the production domain without any further intervention. On the next slide, I think, is a picture of the monitoring that goes with this, and that tells us about the fact that once we've established that we want to do this, it's important that the production domain, which isn't highly secure, doesn't have any users manually put into it. So we've got a few UIs that allow us to track and monitor what's been going on. So the UIs here are giving us a picture of the request's history at the top right. So that's effectively an audit trail of exactly who's been using things. The picture at the bottom is a sample portal, in fact, Microsoft have provided a sample portal with source code that we take and we build into an existing portal, or we extend, or we simply use as it is. But we can take that. It's not a specific supported portal that will be continuously upgraded by Microsoft necessarily, but it shows us how to use the APIs to activate the roles. And the promised, if we go to the next slide, Hugh, the promised picture of the monitoring, I believe that's on the next slide. So there's a service that runs in the production domain, which monitors the privileged groups. And if somebody puts a user specifically into that privileged group, there will be an alert. So it says, you can see on that event, a user that's not in the PAM system was found in a monitored security group. So it will alert us if manual memberships are fiddled with in the production environment in these privileged groups that shouldn't be accessed. Of course, we'll try and prevent that with permissions, naturally enough. But if someone decides, who's currently domain admin, to maybe grant themselves some permanent accesses or something, then we will get alerts on that to prevent the circumvention of this system once we have decided to use it. Good. So I believe that's all from me. Back to Hugh.
Thanks very much, James. What about, I think just in summary there, let's say that when it comes to PAM, you can see that it's a completely different scenario. It's a scenario that involves a lot of Microsoft components, of which MIM happens to be one. It is not our plan at the moment to roll out any training for that, and part of the reason for that is we're waiting to see what the deployment pack looks like. Now, we've been very much involved with the deployment pack, but it's not finished yet, and it's not clear exactly what it'll look like. That deployment pack is designed to make it as easy as possible to implement MIM in a PAM scenario. Depending on how that turns out, that will affect the kind of training that's needed. We're aware that there is some demand, at least, for PAM training, so it's a matter of watch this space, I think. Okay, what about upgrading to MIM? I said I'd say something else about this. So in principle, it's an in-place upgrade, but our advice is not to treat this like a simple patch. Treat it more like a formal development rollout. So apply in a test system before production, and also consider applying all the latest FIM patches first. Not only will that hopefully make it go more smoothly, but it's a lot easier to sort out if it doesn't go. Client components may work with the new existing client components, may work with the new MIM version, sorry, but our advice would be to make sure everything gets replaced together. As far as licensing is concerned, if you've got software assurance, you can just upgrade. It is worthwhile thinking that if you need new licenses, just consider the fact that EMS licenses do now cover the CAL. So the CAL is really about the use of the portal, not just the portal, but some other features as well, but primarily that's how it affects people. If you're using the portal, and if you're thinking that your users may want EMS licenses for cloud usage, O365 and so on, it's worthwhile thinking about whether you could just bring those two together, and that would be a better way of doing it. So if you've got EMS licenses, that covers the MIM CAL and also gives you unlimited server licenses. So how does this affect training? Well, first of all, remember that we provide 3 training formats: live, traditional physical classroom, remote access to a live classroom, so you're still in the class in the sense that you're represented there by at least your labs being there, but you are wherever you need to be. And then the last sort is on-demand online self-paced training, where you go at your own pace, you have access to a VM which you take in your own time, and you get remote support initiated through email. Also note that most of the changes to FIM are either under the covers, in other words they haven't substantially changed the product, or they're to PAM and CM, which we're not covering in our existing courses, in our standard courses anyway, and they're otherwise fairly minimal. And that means that while we've fully updated our courses for all the current versions of everything, which has been quite an effort for us, the actual experience at the end of it is not so very different. And so we are, it's important that people don't feel the need, having done the FIM courses, to also do the MIM courses. We really don't think that's necessary. And also that if you came to a class and ended up doing a MIM course, but really you were using FIM, I don't think that would matter either, because we would certainly call out in the class those areas where FIM used to work like this, FIM used to work like that. So just summarizing a little bit then, our FIM Fundamentals course 520 has become 620. You'll see that we gave a lot of thought to the new naming convention, 521, 621, 522, 622, and so on. What we've added to the Fundamentals course is a brief overview of PAM, and actually we've included Behold as well there, because Behold unchanged, by the way, completely unchanged, but Behold, we are aware that people want to know more about it, so we've included that. Also the inclusion of the unlock feature and the phone gate. The phone gate makes use of the cloud multi-factor authentication capability. So if you've got that capability in the cloud, it just gives you a very easy way of hooking into that rather than having to have a different provider for sending one-time passwords and so on. For the advanced course, well, the feedback's been that it's too long, and so we've taken the opportunity to pension off a bit of material. In particular, we feel that detected rule entries, which we've always been dubious about, have no meaningful future. We're doing less on reporting, and we've reorganized it somewhat in response to feedback that we've had. We've also included more in the way of lab safety nets, meaning that if you get to a point in the labs and you haven't quite done them perfectly, you don't necessarily have to complete that in order to move forward. Additional coverage of new management agents, a mention of MIM and the cloud. So again, not substantially changed. In fact, just a few, mostly it's been cut down a little and streamlined and reorganized. As far as the expert course is concerned, again, actually not huge changes, but we're beefing up the coverage of reporting and extendable management agents, particularly the extension parts of reporting, like writing reports and extending the schema. And more on the reality of MIM implementation. In the past, we've shied away from using OCG tools in the course. We've decided to introduce these tools into the course because if they make it easier, why wouldn't we use them? For all our courses, we've changed the labs so as not to use any deprecated features. That means that when eventually they do take them out, and by the way, they have not been taken out, and maybe I didn't make that clear earlier, although they've been deprecated, the list still sits there, will be taken out one day. They have not yet been taken out, and they're still in MIM. Sorry, I did forget to make that clear earlier. So again, just on the same topic, all future live traditional physical classroom courses will be MIM courses. So from now on, when you book a public class or a private class, unless there's a very unusual circumstance, we will be teaching MIM. However, we will call out where FIM is different, and nobody should feel shortchanged by that. Obviously, this applies to students who join remotely as well. As far as the on-demand online self-paced training courses are concerned, we still have a little work to do, and we will not be making a specific announcement. We will just cut over when we can, and people will find themselves doing a MIM course rather than a FIM course. We expect that process to be completed during Q4. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the ongoing story of synchronization. You will probably be aware that MIM normally sits there synchronizing data as its primary raison d'etre. So as somebody gets entered into, for example, an HR system, we would expect them to be propagated around into other systems, and we would expect also that if they get removed or disabled, that would also propagate around. So we're used to that, but we're also aware of the fact that that can apply equally to groups, for example, or to OUs, or to anything that you want to synchronize. And that's been extended so that groups, OUs, users can be managed in some quite interesting ways by Behold, by use of roles. And so our on-premises identity platform looks like this, whether it's FIM, MIM, much the same diagram, nothing's really changed there. and Behold can be manipulating the data in the meta directory and making it available to the target systems. So what I want to talk about here is the situation with the cloud. So as Active Directory gets extended to the cloud, it needs to be synchronized. Now, Active Directory has always lived in a world of synchronization. Synchronization between DCs has just happened. The synchronization of AD on-prem to AD in the cloud takes place through a specific component which you install called AD Connect. And that will handle users, password groups, and that means distribution lists as well, contacts, whatever. And if we put that into the context of MIM, we see that instead of MIM, I apologize for the wrongly named FIM 2010 there, but it is just the same. FIM or MIM there is not directly managing that synchronization. It is not reaching into the cloud, although it could do. The recommended way is that you make use of AD Connect to synchronize your AD, and you use MIM on-premise to synchronize all your various heterogeneous, maybe multi-forest or whatever it is situations on-premise. And then in the cloud, you've got a whole different set of synchronization of accounts going on. So that's what the picture looks like. The FIM portal then, which can be used to manage users and groups in an interesting way, is also managing those very same users and groups in the cloud, because the users that you manage in the portal and across your various directories and databases, the very same users are being synchronized by AD Connect. And AD Connect is in fact really just the same synchronization engine. It just looks a little different now, and by looking at it, we get an idea about where synchronization is going, where Microsoft synchronization is going. But fundamentally, at its heart, it is the same synchronization engine. So in this diagram, there are two, if you like, MIM or FIM or whatever you want to call it, synchronization engines in use. So we can handle users, we can also handle groups, and Office 365 will be able to make use of the very same groups for SharePoint, security, or for distribution lists in Office 365 in Outlook, as managed by FIM on-premise, the very same ones. And the user, of course, gets that SSO experience because we're properly managing those identities right across the organization. And in fact, we can talk about a continuum of services. You can, for example, choose to do self-service password reset in the FIM portal or in the cloud, or to gradually cut over. You can choose to manage groups in the portal or groups in the cloud. So in the future, the way you might be moving is that Azure Active Directory takes care of those things, but right now it's on-premise. Here we have a way of having those coexisting until we're ready to make those changes. So what about our training course development in respect of this change, this move towards the cloud of identity? Well, we're focusing on breadth and not depth. In other words, we're not going to put a lot of further effort into MIM training courses, but rather we're going to build on our MIM training courses. So expect to see an AD Connect training course. Expect to see training courses for Active Directory Premium, that is, cloud, self-service password reset, multi-factor authentication, group management, software as a service management, and so on. Expect to see an Azure RMS training course, protecting documents at rest and in motion, and expect to see Intune training as well. So that's the way that we see things going, and again, it's watch this space, but we're putting a lot of effort into this right now. Okay, so looking at a typical MIM setup, one of the things you'll see is a certain amount of disagreement over whether it's Microsoft Identity Manager or Forefront Identity Manager. But let's just to show you one or two things. Now, I'm just also going to show you something in Azure. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you happen to have got an Azure tenancy, and that you've also got AD Premium. That'll mean that you can set up what's called a multi-factor authentication provider, and I've done a test one here in our own corporate Azure just to show you. Very, very simple point-and-click wizardy thing. So you can set that up. Having set it up, you can then download a file which gives you a certificate and a password and various bits and pieces. Now, on your on-premise MIM machine, in the service folder for MIM, you'll find MFA settings, and if I just edit that, you'll see it's a very simple XML file where we put all the license information that we just got from our MFA provider. So what that means is that when you come to set up your self-service password reset, you've got the opportunity to use a new gate. So let me just go into the workflows here, and it's just decided to hold me up a little. What we're going to do is take a look at the authentication workflow. This is the workflow that people hit when they do a self-service password reset. And it's just waking up, I hope. And up to now, you've been able to do the sort of Q&A thing where you set up a bunch of questions, and when somebody registers for self-service password reset, they give their answers to questions which are tokenized and stored in the FIM database or the MIM database. And that means that when they want to reset their password, they can use that mechanism. In an earlier version of FIM, or rather a late version of FIM, but earlier than the MIM version we're looking at, it was also possible to have one-time passwords sent to an email address or to a phone. But the problem with the phone way of doing it is you needed an additional provider to allow you to send a text. And that meant going and buying a subscription and setting it up. Sorry, this is very, very slow. This is just my laptop here is a bit overwhelmed by what's going on, and it's taking a while to come up. So what you'll find now is that in addition to those existing gates, there's a new phone gate, and the phone gate allows you to hook into the MFA that you may have got in the cloud. So if you've got AD Premium, as I showed you, you can set up the MFA provider, configure it in that XML file that I showed you, and then you could add a new workflow step, a new gate, and if it'll only respond, here we go. You'll see that in addition to the password gate, the one-time SMS gate, all of this stuff, you've got a phone gate. Now, I won't take this any further than simply showing you that it's there, because to actually try and use this on this demo would be a bit pointless. You wouldn't be able to see my phone and so on. But suffice it to say that having configured it, and the configuration, as you can see, is extremely simple. And when somebody registers, they're going to register their phone number, and that phone number is then going to be sent to call them, and that call, just the fact that you answered the call, is the verification that's required. Okay, so that's one thing that's new. Let's have a look at something else. If I show you the familiar Sync Service Manager and go into the ADMA, we take a look at the properties for the ADMA, and I'm sorry that everything's happening so slowly, and look at the way that the password is enabled. You'll see that there's now a checkbox that says unlock blocked accounts when resetting passwords. So this is the idea of being able to unlock your own account rather than have to reset the file as well. Now, to show you that, I need to just briefly log on as a user. So we'll just try that. And I realize that this may be coming up a little bit more slowly for you than I'm talking, so apologies for that. But I am typing in somebody's name, and then I'm going to say that I've got problems logging in. Now, those of you that are familiar with it, this starts off exactly as normal. So I didn't actually implement the phone gate. I'm still relying on the old question and answer system. And if it will respond for me, we will be asked the questions. We answer our questions, give our secret answers to our questions. They're compared tokenized and compared with what's in the MIM database, and it'll then take me forward to reset my password. I'm afraid the demo gods are not with me here at the moment. Just hang on a moment longer, see what we can do. And no, it's decided to let me down. So what we would do is authenticate with our questions in the usual way, and then when we get to the final screen, we'll be given a choice of either resetting our password or just unlocking our account. And that gets away from this idea that the only way to unlock your password, and unlocks happen quite often. Oh, here we go, finally. We can see if it'll respond. Unfortunately, it'll probably be just as slow responding to the next thing, but we'll give it a try if I can remember the answers that I gave before. And we're given the choice to unlock without resetting the password. As you can see, all happening very, very slowly, nothing to do with MIM, entirely to do with everything that I'm running on my laptop here. Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. And check that that's working. Oh, there we go. So you'll see that you can keep your current password and unlock your account, or you can enter a new password and unlock your account as well. Okay, let's get out of there. And that is pretty much all that we've got time to show you. Obviously, the PAM additions are the big thing here, but those are the obvious additions within MIM itself. Okay, so here are some upcoming dates. As I said before, I think all public courses from now on, all physical courses, are going to be MIM courses, not FIM courses. Those are the dates for the US. They can be attended physically or remotely. Self-paced courses will come up a little bit later in next quarter. And for the UK, here are the corresponding public dates. These will all be MIM courses, and in this case, we don't at the moment have the opportunity to join those remotely. We're looking at that possibility, and of course, self-paced learning as before. And here is our special webinar offer. So this is a discount available to all of you by quoting this code, as long as you do so before the 18th of September. So that's it. We look forward to seeing you on a course soon. Any questions? Questions about sales to Mark Forbes, and also if you've got any technical questions or questions about this webinar, you can also email him and we'll follow those up. He'll make sure they get distributed to whoever they should go to. So thanks very much for attending, and have a great day.